capitalist class are starting to have serious doubts about Trump. But what can they do about it? They cannot use the rest of the Republican Party against him. It's increasingly clear that the judiciary will not or cannot rein him in. And their media, the old-line TV stations and newspapers, for example, no longer have the influence on the masses of Americans that it used to have. The unprecedented nature of this situation is revealed by Trump's first action on his first day in office, which was to pardon the 1,500 federal prisoners who had been convicted for their role on the January 6th coup attempt. Incidentally, when they were deciding who to pardon and who not to, Trump famously said, well, fuck it, let's just pardon them all. These are violent fascist organizers, and many of them will certainly be out there organizing as we speak today, right this minute. And as opposed to the past, they will have the financial backing of the Nazi saluting Elon Musk. This means the potential for a mass fascist paramilitary. And to give an example of what is happening, there's the eugenics conference, which is literally Nazi science, planned in the deep Republican state of Texas. And the University of Texas is associated with this conference, as is Elon Musk himself indirectly. And if 10 to 15 years ago, anybody had told me we'd be seeing this sort of thing here, I'd have told them they are hysterical. I'm not saying that fascism is literally about to take power in the U.S., but I never would have thought we'd seen what we are seeing here today. Another possibility is this. In a situation of mass crisis, to which Trump might respond by trying to call on the military, possibly to prevent a setback of his party in the 2026 by-election, I think that it is not ruled out that under the right circumstances, wings of the military would actually start to take their independence of the civilian government, which is to say of the president. It is a question that certainly needs to be thought through a lot more, especially because it would be totally unprecedented in all of U.S. history. And that is to say, for the military to act against the president, which is to say they would be doing it on behalf of the U.S. capitalist class. So now let's look for a minute at the opposition that is starting to develop. We have had all around the country, including in my area, a whole host of little local protests, almost all of which have been controlled either by the union bureaucracy or the non-profiteers, both of which are linked to the Democratic Party. The union leadership has been almost entirely silent, or in some cases it would be better if they had been silent. Now you do have Sarah Nelson, the president of the flight attendants, who several weeks ago called for a national general strike, but there's no indication that she's doing anything to organize along those lines. So the result is that we cannot rule out the possibility of a mass revolt. But I think that it would be chaotic and disorganized, something similar maybe to the French Yellow Vest movement of 2018. If that were to happen, then the role of the socialists, I believe, would be to encourage it, to emphasize the centrality of the working class struggle and the need for working class independence and, quite frankly, for socialism. I think there are two things, meanwhile, that we can and should be advocating. And this is where I'll conclude. First and foremost, for the movement in general, we have to see that the triumvirate is actually extremely vulnerable in one key industry, and that is food production. It is vulnerable because a huge proportion of the workforce is immigrant labor, and the majority of that labor is undocumented. Already, many of them are staying off from work for fear of being rounded up and deported. So what I think we should advocate is that the union should organize in that sector, encourage those workers to, in effect, go on strike, which is to say what they're already starting to do, and organize union members and supporters to stand the strike picket line for them. If that even started to happen, the U.S. grocery store shelves unity within a week. Now, of course, the union leadership is not going to do that without massive pressure from below. Now, the second thing that I think all socialists around the world should think about is the prime need for an international working class solidarity campaign. Such a campaign would make the links between the struggle against repression of people from Palestine to Ukraine, from Italy to the United States, while emphasizing the absolutely central role of the working class, that the working class must be the center and must lead these struggles. Because if it doesn't, then such struggles will inevitably be controlled by the capitalist class. And it will not achieve the results for which so many hundreds of thousands, millions in fact, of people have sacrificed and struggled. Look, for example, at the Great Revolution, which finally overthrew the fascistic Assad in Syria. Today, the new Syrian government is maneuvering, tacking back and forth between the dictates of the governments of the regional power, Turkey and Israel, and global power, the US and Russia, with China hovering in the background. As the movement that, no matter how heroic it may have been, was never led by the working class. And as a capitalist government, when it came time to make international links, which is unavoidable in every instance, when that time came, it had to make links with regional and global capitalist powers. The only other alternative would have been a working class-led revolution that made links with the international working class and helped to develop an international working class movement. That is and will be the same in every single other instance around the world. It does not mean that socialists do not support such movements, but we have to help draw the lessons of the centrality of the world working class and the necessity for international working class solidarity. I hope that one result of this conference and similar efforts will be considered taking up this banner for a campaign for international working class solidarity. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you, John. Now, I should inform you that unfortunately there was an interruption in the YouTube live. We reinstated it. We are not sure what that will mean for viewership. Thank you for introducing, your perspective as union activist. I mean, I'm not sure if I should say ex-union activist or union activist. I guess it's still what you're doing, even if the unions are not there anymore. I also thought, and this is what I tried to convey when I introduced you, that that's a very important aspect of the US trajectory that then brings us where we are also in Europe. I'll move on to Anna. Thank you for your patience. And then after Anna's intervention and Julia's reading of a comrade's letter from the Ukrainian front, we'll open the discussion. Let me bring up my notes. And now I'll refer to Italian. Anna Telecoda è una professoressa e ricercatrice ucraina, anche lei nativa di Donetsk, professoressa di storia all'Università di Losanna, con un focus sull'imperialismo e sul nazionalismo ucraino e russo. Scrive per testate europee, da Jacobin a Politics, e la sua è una delle voci, assieme ad Alexander, che all'inizio dell'operazione genocida israeliana ha denunciato il campismo neoliberale che difende l'Ucraina ma svaluta le ditte palestinesi, in modo analogo al corrispettivo verso uno che fa esattamente il contrario ma con lo stesso metodo. È una delle fondatrici in Svizzera del Comitato di Solidarietà per l'attivismo antiguerra ucraino e russo, è anche lei un membro dell'organizzazione socialista ucraina Youth e di multiple reti e organizzazioni di sinistra anti-autoritaria. Ci parlerà della necessità di difesa, del cosiddetto riarmo europeo e delle criticità, dei pericoli neoliberali che si porta appresso. Anna, thank you again, the floor is yours.
Thank you very very much. Thanks to organizers and thanks to your team. You are doing very important work. I mean, the work of practical solidarity, because without practical bottom-up solidarity, all the talks we do today wouldn't have any sense. So thank you for your work and for your dedication to pursue it, and also thanks to the audience for their interest, for their patience also. And I will try to be short and please make a sign if you see that I'm too long. So I think today it should be clear by now that the impunity of the aggressors like Russia, like Israel and other countries on the international level, the impunity of the aggressors is directly fueling the rise of fascist forces in our countries and vice versa. And the rise of these forces that are combining authoritarianism and libertarianism, economic libertarianism, it must be taken very seriously. We see the crackdown on migrants, the institutionalization of misogyny, of homophobia, the denial of climate change. We see also the acceptance and normalization of ruthless exploitation of both people and nature, the normalization of the idea of liquidation of Ukraine, of deportation of Palestinians, destruction of their homes and lives. And it seems like these are these pillars of this new order that Putin and Trump are trying to impose on the rest of the world. And also, maybe we will have time to talk about it later, but despite this very dark picture, let's be attentive to the fact that the resistance is also rising, and the resistance in Ukraine is continuing, but also you see how in recent days and weeks in many countries the resistance against authoritarianism and against the fascist forces is rising, and people are going in the streets, and we must support these movements as far as we can. But as we are in Europe, maybe I should focus on this question. So now I think it is very clear that for decades European countries have underinvested in their security because they were relying and outsourcing their security to American military power, assuming that large-scale conflicts on the European continent it's a thing of the past. But now this very strange security mechanism is crumbling, and the large-scale war is not just on the large-scale war on the European continent. It's not just a hypothetical possibility. It's already happening because it's devastating the biggest European country for more than 3 years. And I think in these circumstances, the question of defense and security can no longer be ignored. And I think we are truly facing as a humanity, but also as a European community, truly facing a defining moment. And deliberately ignoring this reality is simply impossible. I think the most dangerous approach to this problem, to the problem of security, would be to slash social spending to fund military institutions. And so And this is the solution that neoliberals are already proposing, namely to reduce budgets for healthcare, education, pensions, welfare. And of course, they don't put it in that way. They say instead, for example, like President Macron in France, that he wants to increase military spending without raising taxes. So basically, he's saying that I will cut in your social spending. So it is evident that weakening in such a way social safety of the society would actually deepen inequality and ultimately destabilize democracies from the inside. And at a time when far-right populism is on the rise in the most important European countries, on the rise or already partly in power, like in Italy, and on the rise like in Germany, on the rise like in France. So this solution of imposing austerity would actually strengthen these anti-democratic forces, and given that Russia and the US now, they openly support these forces, like openly, I mean, G.D. Vance doesn't hide in his intentions. Such a move is exactly what Trump and Putin are hoping for. They are hoping that European leaders will make a bad decision that will undermine their own legitimacy. And in fact, many of these European politicians who now speak of the very real need to strengthen the defense, these are the same people and the same political forces who paved the way for this crisis also. Because, of course, they rightly condemn abuses of power on the international stage, for example, by Russia, but they also tolerate or encourage Darwinian logic within their own societies. They are encouraging a system where the most powerful continue to dominate the most vulnerable. And this kind of inconsistency, of course, it undermines their legitimacy and creates a fertile ground for the rise of fascist movements who capitalize on these fractures. And of course, I think you know it itself that a society that feels abandoned and ignored by politicians, by its own political elites, do not want to support international commitments, even if these commitments are there to uphold some fundamental principles like defense of rights, defense of sovereignty, of international law, and populists, both right populists but also left populists, they exploit this discontent by fueling the idea that governments are sacrificing national wealth, national interests in favor of some distant causes like supporting Ukraine, for example. So it's a very dangerous situation, and of course a society that is better equipped to support its international commitments, it's only a society that is cohesive and that it doesn't feel abandoned by its own elites. So in this sense, I think in Europe it should be a priority, effective and urgent measures to redistribute wealth in order to restore the trust of citizens. So in this sense, the help that European countries can provide to Ukraine also depends on their capacity to resolve their own internal crisis of legitimacy. But I must repeat it again and again, reiterating what was already said. The aid that truly matters for Ukraine is military aid, we cannot put this question aside. We cannot say, oh, we help Ukraine, but we are against the military aid. It doesn't work like that. Because it's the most crucial condition for Ukrainian survival as a society, as well as for each of the members of this society. And I think the real question now, also particularly for the left, is does it have a concrete plan or program or idea how to address these urgent challenges that we all face? And as I was watching a lot of European Parliament debates and the national debates, there are left-wing and ecological critics of this plan of European rearmament, and they are totally right when they say that, okay, we're talking about rearmament, but neither the ecological crisis nor systemic inequality has disappeared. These are the problems that persist, and indeed these are, especially the ecological crisis, it's an existential threat to all of us that should be and should remain at our focus. But there is a crucial thing that they often ignore and that should never be ignored in my opinion. And the Ukrainians know it very well that, okay, we also care about human rights and environment and equality, but we also know that neither human life nor environment can be protected if your state falls within the so-called zone of interest of some autocratic imperial powers like Russia, China, and now the United States are also becoming such a power. In this, if you are becoming a vassal state of such autocratic powers, you can just forget about all the struggles for justice, ecology, and liberties that we all need so much. Because in a world that is dominated by this kind of great power, unchecked great power politics, progressive organizations and figures and their values are quickly pushed to the margins. First, they are pushed to the margins politically, then physically, and actually we see it right before our eyes in the US how in the period of a few weeks or even days the society can be paralyzed, and most of its progressive elements are pushed to the margins, but of course our hope is that they will resist. So abstract slogans about, let's abolish war. Everybody would like to abolish war, but if you were just advancing these abstract slogans, it reveals, I think, not only the lack of practical solutions, but also the lack of will to take responsibility, to engage in very difficult work of governance, of strategy, of actually proposing solutions. And those political organizations that are just refusing to confront the reality, that we now face, they become not actors but just observers. They comment about the events, but they are not shaping the events. And if in doing so, they actually abandon politics and they surrender these tasks of security and defense, of articulating the security and defense with social security and social equality. They surrender these tasks to those they ideologically oppose, to the right, conservative right and far right, who have the advantage to propose easy solutions. These are bad solutions, but these are easy solutions. So I think we should seriously think about the fact that we are confronted with a false choice. The choice between social justice and security, as Alexander said, it's a false choice. It's totally possible, not just possible, but necessary to articulate and to have both. And as I said, of course, security should never be paid by cutting pensions or healthcare. So if we want not just to be observers, we must push for tax justice. We must push for closing all the numerous loopholes that allow corporations to avoid paying taxes. We also must crack down on offshore tax havens that exist inside Europe and prosper during the crisis. So I think instead also of each state talking about increasing its own military budget, we should above all focus on strengthening European collective security mechanism and coordination, which is lacking. So, and also an important thing that I wouldn't have time to develop, but that security, energy is also part of military security. Energy security must be considered